Dry mercy baked under the mid-morning sun, like a forgotten tin kettle left too long on a fire. The dirt road that cut through its heart was dry as bone, churned by boots and wagon wheels, its dust swirling lazily in the canyon breeze. Buildings leaned into the wind like weary old men, their wood faded to gray, their signs creaking above empty porches. There was no mercy in dry mercy, just heat, silence, and the eyes of men too tired or too cruel to care. She came into view slowly, her rusted cart squealing with every inch it dragged forward, one wheel stubbornly resisting the pull. Mara June's thin fingers gripped the bar across her lap, steering the cart with a practiced push of her arms and the shifting weight of her narrow torso. Her legs, twisted and useless, were wrapped in faded calico, dirt-streaked, and bound with leather straps to keep them from swinging. Her face was gaunt beneath her bonnet, skin drawn taut over high cheekbones, eyes like storm clouds behind cracked glass. From the saloon stoop, 3 men laughed like coyotes on a carcass. One spat into the dust near her front wheel. "Look at that thing crawl," he said, thumb hooked through his stained suspenders. "Ain't right, a woman like that out on her own. Should have been left in the river like a runt pup." Another chimed in, slurring already despite the hour. "Bet she don't even feel it when you kick her." Mara didn't flinch. She kept her eyes ahead, lips pressed in a hard, unforgiving line. The wheel snagged on a rock, jarring the whole frame. She shifted, adjusted, rolled forward again, steady, slow, defiant. Children stopped their games to watch her pass, their laughter dying in the heat. A shopkeeper pulled his crates back off the walkway, as if afraid her shadow might taint his goods. Women peeked from behind curtains, whispering of curses, sins, and stories that never had clean endings. Everyone had a version of her history, none of them kind. Some said she used to be a dancer in Carson City. Others claimed she'd been struck down by lightning after cursing a preacher. But most leaned toward one tale, that she'd married the outlaw Cashen Reic, and God punished her for loving a man like that. Truth was, no one had seen Cashen in 5 years. He was either dead or worse. And Mara June? She was what he left behind. She turned the corner toward the mercantile, arms trembling from the exertion, sweat streaking the sides of her face. A boy, maybe 12, freckled and lean, stood in the alley between the stables and the general store, one hand clutching a wooden rake. His name was Eli, the blacksmith's apprentice. He watched her the way one might watch a thunderhead, unsure whether to run or wait for the lightning. The cart rattled to a stop outside the mercantile. Mara reached into a small pouch at her waist and retrieved 2 worn coins. She held them out, silent, waiting. Inside, the clerk, a man who'd once broken wild mustangs, but now flinched at hard conversation, took the coins and handed her a small sack of flour. He didn't speak. He never did. As she reached to secure the bag, the saloon doors behind her burst open with a hollow bang of weather-beaten wood. A heavy bootstep followed. Laughter. "Still crawling around like a cursed bug, are ya?" The voice belonged to Horace Klein, a ranch hand who thought his size excused his meanness. His boots scraped closer, spurs jangling. "You deaf too, Mara?" She didn't answer. She never did. Horace stepped beside her cart, swaying slightly, bottle still in hand. He raised it to his lips, then lowered it with a grunt. "Heard your man's bones are bleaching in the desert. Heard he begged like a dog when the rangers caught him." Still, Mara didn't speak. Her hand tightened slightly on the cart bar, the only sign she'd even heard. Horace grinned. "Always was curious what you were worth without that devil of yours nearby." The blow came without warning. A backhand, fast and full of spite, cracked across her cheek, snapping her head sideways. Her bonnet twisted off, revealing a jagged scar that ran from her temple to her jawline. The street went still. Even the wind paused. She didn't fall. Her spine straightened, thin and proud. She slowly turned her head back toward him, blood blooming on her lip like a red flower in the dust. Horace laughed, stepping back. "She can take a hit, boys. Maybe she ain't so worthless after all." From the alley, Eli gripped the rake tighter, the wood creaking under his fingers. His breath came fast. He took a step forward, then stopped. What could a boy do against a man like Horace? Mara saw him. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, met his for the briefest second. Not pleading, not afraid, just steady. Then she reached down, picked up the sack of flour, and placed it across her lap. Her hand trembled, but she moved. The cart creaked forward once more. Horace let her pass, the laughter echoing behind her like gunfire in an empty canyon. No one stopped him. No one helped her. Dust rose behind her wheels. Flies buzzed near the trough. The heat pressed down like a blanket soaked in fire. She passed the church. No one prayed for her there. She passed the jail. No one would protect her there. She passed the cemetery. She did not look. At the far edge of town, where the dirt road gave way to thornbrush and flatstone, she finally stopped beneath the skeleton of a once mighty tree. There, she let the sack slide from her lap. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded cloth, dabbing gently at the blood on her chin. Her eyes remained dry, not because there were no tears left, but because tears were for people who believed someone might care. Behind her, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faintest echo, far too soft for the town to hear. But Mara's head turned, just slightly, as if catching a scent carried from far away. The boy, still in the alley, watched her silhouette shrink into the distance. He would remember the sound of that slap for the rest of his life, and the way she didn't scream. The nights were worst. Mara lay stiff in her cot, the cracked ceiling above her flickering with lantern shadows, pain settling into her spine like cold iron driven deep. Her legs hadn't moved in 5 years, not since the ambush in Canyon Black. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept without waking drenched in sweat and silence, heart pounding from memories that came like ghosts, uninvited, cruel, and vivid. But sometimes, when the pain dulled and the wind howled soft through the shutter cracks, the past crept back, not as a wound, but a balm. She saw herself again, 23, fearless, laughter like whiskey poured over ice. The way she'd spun in her red silk dress at the Coyote Bluff Saloon, gun holstered under her skirts, every note she sang threaded with defiance. She wasn't just entertainment. She was the heat in the room. Every eye followed her, but only one pair had ever held her gaze. Cashen Reic leaned in the corner like he owned the shadows. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice struck like a flint. He was Outlaw by name, but not by soul. Folks said he once shot a sheriff who beat his own daughter, said he never stole from churches, and once gave a widow back her land papers, along with the man who tried to forge them. Bound and gagged, she'd fallen for him faster than a thunderstorm crossed the plains. They danced in the alley behind the saloon one night, boot to boot, beneath a full moon that turned the dust silver. He kissed her like a man who thought he didn't deserve to. They were married 2 weeks later at Widow's Cry, the sacred stone where old Apache widows used to wail for their lost braves. Just them, the stars, and the desert wind. Cass had made her a promise that night. One day, I'll buy us land somewhere green. You'll never have to sing for men again unless you feel like it. He meant every word, but men like Cass don't get to stay still for long. A bounty bigger than sense hovered over his head, and Sheriff Corbin Tuckman, the real villain of Dry Mercy, had made it a point to drag Cass back dead or alive, preferably dead. Tuckman didn't care for codes of justice, especially ones not written in ink and blood under his name. Cass tried to run, tried to retire, but the law wouldn't leave him be. Neither would the liars he'd crossed on the way up. That night in Canyon Black changed everything. They'd taken shelter in an abandoned church near the mesa, just until the moon passed. Mara had just laid down her rifle when the first shot cracked the window. Cass dove, pulling her behind the altar, but they were already surrounded. Bullets ripped through the wood like lightning through trees. She remembered screaming his name, remembered the sting in her back as something hot punched through her spine. She remembered the sound Cass made when he saw her fall. It wasn't human. He carried her bleeding body to the back wall, blasted a hole through the rotten planks, and vanished into the dark with his gang. He kissed her before he left, her blood on his lips, said he'd come back for her. No one saw him again. They said he died in a gunfight near Devil's Basin. Some swore he was buried under a false name outside Tucson. Others claimed he turned on his gang and vanished into the cliffs like a coyote, with no pack. But Mara never believed it. She didn't cry when the papers wrote him off. She didn't mourn with the women who sneered behind her back. She just survived. She learned to drag herself with her hands, to aim from the waist, to bite her tongue when they spat at her. She built a cage around her heart, and inside it, one name still burned like coal. Now, 5 years later, that name was all she had. The door creaked open. Morning light cut across the floor in dusty strips. Eli entered carefully, carrying a chipped tin plate and a stale biscuit. He set it down beside her bed, eyes on the floor. "Sorry it's hard," he mumbled. "Miss Ruth ran out of yeast again." She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Eli." He looked up, surprised she'd spoken, then nodded and left as quietly as he came. Mara stared at the biscuit. Her fingers moved slowly, stiff from the cold in her joints. She forced herself to eat, one bite at a time. She didn't eat because she was hungry. She ate because she refused to die on her knees. Outside, the town buzzed with new trouble. A mining crew from over the ridge had ridden into Dry Mercy the night before. 9 of them, loud and crude, already drunk by breakfast. They'd brought coin and cruelty, and both spent easy. The saloon was packed with men laughing too hard, boots stomping too loud. They didn't ask questions. They didn't have to. By noon, they'd started their game. Who could spit the farthest? Who could shoot the tail off a dog? Who could drink a whole bottle without vomiting? But then the game turned darker. $10 says she flinches if you slap her hard enough, one of them said, gesturing out the saloon window at Mara's cart crossing the road. "No way," laughed another. "They say she don't feel nothing from the waist down, like a dead fish." "I'm talking the face, idiot. You slap the face. It ain't about the legs. It's about the shame." They roared. One of them, a barrel-chested man named Jex, his beard full of tobacco and spit, pushed through the saloon doors, bottle in one hand, challenge in the other. Mara didn't see him at first. She was near the blacksmith's barn, trying to trade cloth scraps for a tin of oil. The cart rolled slow, her arms trembling slightly. Her back ached with the burn of a storm coming on. Jex walked up, slow and swaggering, the crowd behind him eager for blood without bullets. "Hey, sweetheart," he drawled, voice heavy with contempt. "You mind if I ask you something?" Mara looked up. "Do you even feel pain anymore?" he asked, lifting the bottle. Then he hit her, not with the bottle, with his hand, flat and hard across the side of her face. She didn't fall, but the sound cracked like a whip. The town froze. The wind died. Even the dogs went silent. A smear of blood trickled down her cheek. Her bonnet slipped, revealing that same scar, pale against her dark skin. Her eyes swelled, but she stayed upright. She said nothing. Jex blinked, surprised. "Damn," he said. "Didn't even blink." He turned, triumphant, ready for applause. But none came, because Mara June, beaten and bent in a rusted cart, was staring straight ahead with the kind of silence that spoke of deeper things. Firebanks, gunfire, men buried without names. The kind of silence that came just before thunder. The second slap took her down. Mara hit the ground like a paper doll, dust pluming around her, the sharp edges of the street biting into her elbow. Her face turned to the sun. Her cart tipped with a clatter, one wheel spinning like a broken promise. The men roared with laughter, drunk off power, their boots circling her like vultures around meat. She didn't cry out, not once, but her chest heaved, and her fingers clawed weakly through the dust, trying to push herself upright. Around her, silence spread like a stain. Eli watched from the livery barn shadows, knuckles white around the rake in his hands, too young and too terrified to move. Then it came. A whistle, high, slow, and clear. It rose from the canyons, throat like something ancient being summoned. The kind of sound that stopped a town mid-breath. Heads turned toward the ridge beyond the east bluff. Birds lifted from rooftops in a flurry, startled and sharp. The wind changed, curling in strange directions, as if it, too, remembered the sound. Then hoofbeats. Thunder, low and rising, rolled over the ground in waves. The rhythm of vengeance in motion. The men on the street turned to face it, jaw slack, eyes narrowing against the dust kicked up by riders unseen. Through the haze, They appeared. Black shapes rode like wolves against the horizon. The hollow vultures, 9 riders in dark coats, faces shadowed by broad-brimmed hats, rifles across their backs like the wings of devils. They rode in a tight V formation, dust coiling around them, their horses snorting steam through flared nostrils. At the tip of the spear rode a man in a tattered black duster, silver conchos on his sleeves, and eyes like forged iron. Cashen Reic. His beard was rougher now, streaked with gray. The line of his jaw, once sharp with youth, was thicker, weathered, carved by years of hard living. But his eyes, those gray, merciless eyes, hadn't aged a day. They scanned the town like a hawk circling prey, and when they landed on the woman in the dirt, they didn't blink. He rode slow, deliberate, the hooves of his stallion drumming a warning that echoed down the spine of every man watching. The vultures fanned out behind him, flanking both sides of the street, rifles unslung, fingers curled around triggers. Not a word spoken. Cass dismounted without a sound. The dust from his boots barely rose. He walked to her, Mara, still sprawled, half-conscious in the dust. Her bonnet gone, blood crusted on her cheek, her eyes flickering with the struggle to stay present. He knelt beside her, slow as prayer, and reached out with calloused hands to lift her gently into a seated position. His thumb wiped a smear of blood from her brow. He didn't speak. Not yet. The silence between them spoke more than language ever could. The miners, Jex and his crew, stood frozen, like men who'd stumbled into a legend and knew it. Cass rose. The dust on his coat shimmered in the sun like ash. You. His voice was gravel and gunpowder, aimed straight at Jex. Jex stepped back, stammering, trying to smile. Now hold on, mister. Cass didn't raise his voice. Didn't even reach for his gun. He just took another step. Do you know the difference between a lamb and a lioness? He asked, his tone low and even, more sermon than threat. A lamb won't bite you, no matter how many times you slap it. A lioness, she waits, and then she eats your throat. Jex blinked, sweat beading on his forehead. It was a joke. We didn't mean nothing. She's just some. Name her, Cass interrupted. Jex flinched. What? Say her name. He didn't. Cass's gun was out so fast the crowd didn't even register the draw. 1 minute his hand was still. The next it held death. Mara's voice, soft but clear, drifted from behind him. Jexlyn Carter. Cass didn't hesitate. The shot rang through dry mercy like a final verdict. Jex's chest exploded in red, his body crumpling to the dirt with a dull thud. The other miners backed away, hands up, eyes wide. One tried to draw, but a vulture rifle cocked behind his head stopped him cold. Cass pointed to the 2 who had held Mara's cart steady while she was slapped. Kneel. They did. The townsfolk stood motionless. Sheriff Tuckman hadn't shown himself. Not yet. Perhaps he was behind a curtain, weighing his odds. Or maybe he knew better than to stand between Cashen Reic and retribution. Cass walked between the kneeling men, looking down at them like a man considering whether to bury 2 dogs or leave them to rot. He holstered his pistol with a quiet finality. I once ran with men who killed for sport, he said, voice loud enough now for the town to hear. I left that life. Wanted peace. Wanted her. He gestured toward Mara. But I learned peace don't come to good people. It comes to feared ones. He crouched beside the younger of the 2 miners, face to face. This woman, he said, taught me that being feared isn't enough. You have to be just. And justice. He tapped the man's chest with a gloved finger. Justice is precise. Then he stood. To the rest of you, he called, sweeping his gaze across the gathered crowd. Remember what you saw today. Remember what happens when a crippled woman is stronger than the lot of you combined. He turned to Mara and held out his hand. She took it. The hollow vultures began to move, their horses snorting, the town parting like a sea of cowards and whispers. Cass helped Mara back into her cart, propping her gently, his palm lingering against her cheek for just a second longer than needed. Eli stepped forward then, still trembling, rake in hand. Take me with you, he blurted, breathless. I ain't got nothing here. I want to learn. Cass studied him, then looked to Mara. She nodded once. Cass turned back to the boy. Can you ride? I'll learn. Cass smiled faintly. Then climb up. As Eli swung himself onto the spare horse led by one of the vultures, Cass took his reins and gave one final glance over the town of Dry Mercy. His eyes paused on the saloon, then on the church, then on the sheriff's office, still closed, still silent. Maybe one day, he said softly, more to the wind than to anyone else, someone will teach this town the difference between silence and innocence. He mounted his horse, and then, like smoke curling off a dying fire, they rode out the way they came, dust in their wake, thunder in their hooves, and justice in their passing. The sheriff stepped out at last. Sheriff Corbin Tuckman pushed open the weathered doors of his office with the deliberate gait of a man who'd worn a badge too long without ever answering to it. His vest was pressed, boots shined, hat stiff with authority. But no amount of polish could hide the twitch in his jaw when he saw Cashen Reic standing in the middle of a street, flanked by a gang of riders with eyes as cold as a coffin nail. Tuckman raised both hands in a mock show of peace, voice thin against the wind. Cashen, you made yourself a ghost. Best stay that way. Cass didn't blink. A ghost's got work to do before it rests. The hollow vultures shifted in their saddles. Guns stayed low, but not hidden. Around them, the people of Dry Mercy stood in a hushed semicircle, storekeepers, gamblers, farmers, whores, every one of them knowing they were watching history braid itself into legend. Tuckman's eyes moved to the bodies on the ground, Jexlin Carter's lifeless form, the two miners still kneeling in the dirt. His fingers hovered near the revolver on his hip. One twitch, one breath out of place. That's all it would take. Cass held up a worn leather folder, edges cracked with age. Thought you might want to explain these, he said, tossing it into the dust at Tuckman's feet. The sheriff didn't move. One of the vultures dismounted, picked it up, and flipped it open. His voice rang out, flat and clear. Signed land deeds with falsified owner marks. 11 of them, all seized under false pretenses. Witnesses say the sheriff offered bounties to outlaws in exchange for helping him forge the takeovers. He turned the page. Private letters. Names of men and women who disappeared after trying to file complaints. All tied to Sheriff Tuckman. The folder fell shut with a sharp thwop. Tuckman's smile soured. You got no jurisdiction. You're a fugitive, Cass. Cass shrugged. Out here, justice don't come in uniforms. It comes in daylight, in front of the people who've bled. Another rider unrolled a parchment, this one bearing shaky handwriting, stains from tears or whiskey or both. Statement from Nora Parson, widow. Claims Sheriff Tuckman threatened to jail her sons if she didn't sign over her late husband's claim. Sons were found hanging from an oak 2 days later, labeled a suicide pact. He glanced up. She doesn't buy it. The words sank into the crowd like rain into dry earth. A slow murmur began, uncertain, angry, awakening. Tuckman reached for his pistol, but before it left the holster, 5 hammers cocked in unison. The sheriff froze. Sweat slid down the side of his face. Mara spoke. Her voice rose from her cart, thin and hoarse at first, but finding strength like a buried river breaking through stone. I was one of them. Every head turned. I watched Tuckman shoot a man in the back, a farmer named Jacob Finch. He was unarmed. Tuckman called it justice. She locked eyes with the sheriff. I didn't speak because I knew no one would protect me. I didn't scream when I was dragged. I didn't cry when they broke my spine. But I remember every name, every face. And now, so will you. The town stood motionless, their guilt laid bare. Cass turned back to Tuckman. We ain't asking for a gallows. Just truth. He gestured to the jail. Put yourself inside it, Corbin, or we'll put you under it. The sheriff looked at the crowd. No one came to his defense, not even his own deputies, who watched from behind curtained windows, hands unmoving. Tuckman stepped forward, slow, lips curled in disgust. You think this makes you better than me? Cass's reply was soft. No, just less afraid to pay for what we've done. The sheriff tossed his gun into the dirt and walked toward the jailhouse. The crowd parted. A vulture followed him in and locked the door behind him. Silence fell again, heavy and final. Cass faced the town. His voice reached every ear. We're not lawmen. We're not heroes. But he gestured to Mara. She's more woman than any man here ever gave her credit for. You spit on her. You broke her bones. And still she lived. Still she remembered. That's justice. That's strength. He turned to Mara, crouched beside her, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. You're the bravest damn soul I've ever known. Her hand found his. She squeezed it. Then he stood, addressing the crowd once more. We'll leave now. Peacefully. No more blood. But hear this. If even one finger is raised against her again, we'll return. And next time, we won't talk first. He nodded to his men. They began to prepare. Eli stood at the edge of the group, heart hammering. He had no family, no future in Dry Mercy, only chores and scorn and days that never changed. He stepped forward. Take me with you, he said, voice stronger than he felt. I want to learn the kind of honor that don't wear a badge. Cass looked to Mara again. She studied the boy, then offered the smallest of nods. Cass smiled. Mount up. A rider helped Eli onto a chestnut mare. The boy held the reins like they were the reins to his own destiny. The crowd watched with a blend of awe, shame, and something dangerously close to respect. Mara was last to move. Cass lifted her into a custom-built saddle across a wide, steady horse. She sat tall, back straight, chin high, the wind tugging at her hair. As the gang began to ride out, a child ran forward and placed a flower in her lap. Mara looked down at it, a single desert lily, and something flickered in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of something that could grow. Behind them, Dry Mercy stood still, hushed and waiting. Maybe it would forget. Maybe it would change. But every soul watching knew the story would spread, of the crippled woman who did not beg, and the outlaw who came back from the dead to make the town remember her name. The years rolled over Dry Mercy like dust across the canyon floor, slow at first, then sudden. Time softened the sharp corners of the town, repainted its porches, rebuilt its walls. The saloon still stood, but quieter now. The blacksmith passed his forge to his son, and the church reopened its doors with hymns sweeter than before. A new sheriff arrived wearing a badge that didn't come with a shadow. He walked the streets without a hand on his gun, and when he looked people in the eye, they looked back. No one spoke much about what happened that day, but no one forgot. Some claimed they saw Mara again, walking on her own outside Bisbee, her back straighter, her stride slow but certain. They said a desert healer from the southern mountains worked on her spine with herbs and needles and spirit songs. Others said she never needed the healer, that it was her fury, her pride, her fire that lit her bones and taught her legs to remember what they'd once known. Stories spread like wildfire with no source. One said she helped build a schoolhouse on the borderlands. Another swore she rode with the hollow vultures, silver pistols at her hips, her aim steadier than any man's. A gambler in Dodge claimed to have lost a full purse to a one-eyed rider named June who drank rye and left behind lilies. As for the hollow vultures, they vanished the same way they came, like smoke curling into dusk. Some said they disbanded. Others believed they still rode the high passes, hunting wolves in lawman clothing, settling debts no court dared touch. Folks whispered that they were never true outlaws at all, just a band of broken men who found a reason to ride clean once more. The boy who once hid in shadows grew into a man. He carried no guns, only stories. And when his own children gathered around the fire, eyes wide, hands sticky from burnt sugar apples, he would tell them the one story that never dulled with age. They spat on the crippled woman and slapped her, he'd say, voice soft as the wind through juniper trees. Right there, in the middle of town, where everyone could see. And nobody stopped them. The children leaned closer. Then her outlaw husband showed up. Just rode in with the whole gang behind him. Dust swirling, rifles drawn, like thunder given shape. And not a soul ever lifted a hand to her again. He would pause, and his eyes, older now, rimmed in time, would shimmer beneath the firelight. See, people think legends are made in blood, in gunfire and last stands. But that ain't true. He glanced toward the dark horizon, where the sky melted into canyon walls. In the west, Legends are born the moment someone decides not to kneel.